Hello and welcome to Meanwhile in the West, my weekly program where I read through the letters to the editor of my local newspaper, the West Australian, and criticise the people who write in. So, first letter for this week, filing age for the age pension to 70. It is tough enough now for pensioners to survive on $14,000 a year. Why don't they first look at other welfare recipients and cut those benefits? A lot of them have never worked and never will. They spend on alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, iPads and iPhones, tattoos and punting. So, Mr. Hockey, get your priorities right and look after the folk who have contributed to the economy in their working lives and are entitled to a pension just like the generous remuneration packages that politicians receive. Murray Towton, Geraldton. The welfare system we have, in particular, what do they call it nowadays that we generally refer to as the dole, is not about paying back to people who've paid into the system. It is about providing a safety net for those people who cannot make a living any other way. The unemployed and the unemployable. And at the moment, it is a pittance. It is a very small amount. It is bigger than the age pension, but only because it is aimed at different recipients. And yes, some proportion of those people who are recipients of welfare will spend their money on alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, iPads, tattoos and punting. And in any real society, that should be their entire right. The payment from the government should be yours to do with as you please. If you can afford your rent and you can afford to pay the bills and you can afford to eat, and also to get a tattoo, then you should be able to spend your money on whatever you want to do it with, as long as it's not illegal. And none of that, all of those things are illicit things that you just simply, well, aside from drugs, these are just simply things that you think they shouldn't be spending their money on. And the only time that we should have any kind of say is in terms of things like welfare quarantining, when we're looking at money paid to people for the care of their children. And in those cases, I agree that some proportion of their welfare payment should be set aside for essentials like food. Outside of that, it should be your money to spend how you please. And same with the age pension. Those people who are on the age pension should receive their money and be able to spend it on whatever they like. And the idea that you earn the right to get welfare by earning money gets it all backwards. The basic idea of welfare is to provide for people simply because we are a compassionate society, and also we recognise that providing for those people who don't have money or income actually results in a better society overall. It is not about helping people out because they've paid into the taxation system. And you're right, a big chunk of welfare recipients, I don't know if it's a majority or a minority, maybe they will never get a job. Maybe they will never pay in taxes to balance out what they've received in welfare. And that's probably how we should expect things to be, because those people who pay the majority of taxes aren't going to be the people who are going to need the most support. And that's fine. That's how you build a just and equal society. And that's in fact how you build a stable and safe society. And so you might think of it as the price you pay to live in a society where, we have relatively low crime rates, high levels of education, etc., etc. Next letter. New pay scale, 17th of April 2014. With shops now opening over the weekend, by law, it is time to get the wages into perspective. It is unrealistic for small businesses to support time and a half and double time wages. Why not have the usual weekly wage hours of, I believe, 37.5 hours at normal time, the next 10 hours worked at time and a half, and anything after that at double time? Some IGA shops open 24 hours a day. Paying overtime wages is not realistic, and they only get passed on to consumers. Bernice Greenlee's Sorrento. I've actually worked in fast food when I was younger, and that was pretty much the arrangement we were on. Apart from the half a dozen prescribed public holidays over the year, every other day was at normal time. Sundays, Saturdays, sometimes I'd work till 2, 3 in the morning, and that was normal time, as up to 37.5 hours. And they would never, ever let somebody work more than their 37.5 hours, because they would never want to pay it anything above that. And while that was vaguely all right as a teenager and as a student, this is hardly the kind of career that I want to be in. And you know what? I got out of that industry. And so that's exactly what you would see with retail if you were to push for that. The reason why we compensate people for working at unsociable hours is because it impacts on their family and it impacts on their general psychological well-being and their health. I saw that, and their leisure time. I saw people who were working full-time in the fast food industry. I saw their relationships suffer because they weren't able to spend time with their family and friends because all of their family and friends would get weekends off and they wouldn't. And so we compensate people for that. The other thing about this is that, yes, as consumers, we want shops to be open at 24 hours a day. We want them open whenever we want them to be open, and we want to pay the lowest possible prices. But these are competing demands, and so I think it's fine to pay people overtime, and I think it's even fine to put the prices up. That should get passed on to consumers. That's the price we pay for wanting extended trading hours. And if we want to pay lower prices, then we would argue for smaller trading hours. And I think the thing you've overlooked here also is the differences in scale. So small businesses have it a lot harder than larger businesses. Larger businesses can accommodate this kind of stuff. They can do, when I was in fast food, I was working in a large business. And so they were able to negotiate with the union to have a pretty pathetic deal for its workers. So they managed to screw us out of most of our overtime type entitlements that lots of other people would have. Small businesses are unable to do that. And so yeah, that's what you get. You want extended trading hours? That's what you're going to end up paying for. Next, how do you say it? 22nd of April 2014. After watching Saturday's AFL game between Sydney and Fremantle, I wish to complain about commentators who pronounce the words defence and offence as defence and offence. This is not Australian. It may be the American way, but that does not make it acceptable. Please don't let our language be any more maligned than it is already. Jocelyn A. Taylor, Bunbury. Well, here's the thing, Jocelyn. It's the Australian pronunciation over the last, long time actually, is basically been a mix, a hybrid of British and American. So some words we pronounce in the traditionally British way, and some ways we pronounce in the American way. And defence and defence is a pretty good example of that. Now, you may not be happy with that, but that's not an isolated example. For example, I pronounced it Fremantle, and that is the dominant pronunciation for most people, but that is also the American way of pronouncing it. The British way would be Fremantle. A lot of our language has shifted that way, and you may be upset about it, but I'm sorry. One, you've already lost that battle, and two, I actually don't think it's much of an issue. Nobody's really going to be mistaking us for Americans anytime soon. And the other thing is, the idea of not letting our language be any more maligned. I guess you're suggesting that if we are to pronounce it in ways which are less British, that somehow people would criticise Australian speech. It seems to me that the main people to criticise the Australian accent is people like you, that is Australians, who are upset with the way that it might be shifting against the British colonial past. Next, a horror picture, 22nd of April 2014. Cinemas will soon price themselves out of the market. Movie ticket prices to rise 21st of the 4th. As a pensioner, I seriously doubt whether I would go to the movies at full price. Service has declined. I once waited 15 minutes beyond a scheduled screening with nothing on the screen. When rectified, the movie was without sound, drawing a second complaint. And, when fixed, the sound faded in and out, leading to a final complaint. Cinemas cannot lift prices without lifting their act. K. Robinson, Kingsley. Well, firstly, cinemas will. Secondly, I like the idea that you're basing the idea that service has declined on your one experience. And also, as a pensioner, I didn't think you did need to go to the movies at full price. Yes, cinema prices have been going up. As far as I can tell, no faster than the cost of living or every other price increase across the board here in Western Australia. They are now expensive, but then everything is expensive. There has been consolidation in the market, probably in the last 20 years or so, but there have actually been a boom in building cinemas anyway. So there's lots of cinemas in shopping centres now rather than cinemas as standalone things. And as far as I can tell, they're about as popular as ever. It's just the main demographic, as it has been for the last 20 or 30 years, is teenagers hanging out at shopping centres and going to movies. And I honestly don't see them complaining about services and prices. Yeah, I think you have missed the point that everything has gone up in price. The cost of living in WA is fairly high, and cinemas are no exception. And I do like the idea that you've had one experience and therefore, basically for that, you're going to say the service has declined. And lastly for this week, costly visitors, 22nd of April 2014. As Trent Hudson highlights, Burns and Sympathy, letters 19th of the 4th, we should show more sympathy to those wishing to settle here, especially after a Sri Lankan man set himself on fire. I agree with Mr. Hudson. However, we need to look at the whole picture and the huge numbers wishing to come. An estimated 500,000 asylum seekers are waiting on the shores of North Africa for boats to Europe. Imagine that here. What would we do? We can barely deal with a few hundred. Go to third world countries and there are literally millions who would leave in a flash. We must be realistic. In pure economic terms, who pays for such migration? This country is already straining with welfare payments, and as a result we see the qualifying age for the age pension under threat. That's just the start of it. A. Morovich, Winthrop. Yes, if the argument was that there were literally millions of asylum seekers wishing to come to Australia, then we would struggle economically, and we would struggle massively to accommodate them. Although not as much as you might think. Firstly, the average age of asylum seekers is low. The vast majority of them want to work and will work and have low expectations of the kind of employment they're going to get, and so will work in relatively demanding jobs for relatively small amounts of wages. So actually influx of asylum seekers does actually help to bolster the economy in that sense. A good analogy is to look at the American economy, and the American labour market and their quality of life is bolstered by a large number of illegal immigrants who work for very low amounts of money under terrible conditions. And so actually bringing in larger numbers of asylum seekers would probably actually help our economy in the short term, and it would help to offset some of the ageing workforce issues that we have. That said, yeah, if there was millions, that would be an issue, but there aren't literally millions of people who want to come to Australia. The vast majority of people who are in refugee camps, particularly in Africa, don't want to come to Australia. They want to return to their own country. Failing that, they want to go somewhere near to their country and something that is culturally similar. The people who come to Australia are usually the most desperate for resettlement. In fact, we can head off a lot of this stuff by refugees by actually assisting countries to be more stable and able to accept back the people who've had to flee them. I mean, the conflict in Syria is a perfectly good example of this. Had we as an international community done more to prevent such terrible bloodshed and killings and civil unrest, and even in fact actually the actions of the regime that had led to such civil unrest, we would have far less refugees. And so I would argue that yes, we need to step up our refugee intake, but we also need to do a lot more to stop people from becoming refugees in the first place. And yes, I think a big argument against what you're saying is that these asylum seekers, part of the reason why they're amassing on the shores of North Africa waiting for boats to go to Europe is because that's relatively close to Africa. A lot of these asylum seekers don't want to have to travel. Ideally, they want to be able to live the life that they can have in their own country, free from persecution. And you're conflating them with economic refugees. So there are literally millions of people in third world countries who would leave if they could, are not not people who are seeking asylum. There are millions of people who, for economic reasons, might like to come to Australia, but there's a much smaller number of people who are not just economic migrants, but who are fleeing persecution and who are seeking asylum. And so I don't think the issue is as big as you would think. I mean, we're in a relatively lucky position here in Australia that we are far away from a lot of other countries, and so lots and lots of refugees settle elsewhere, and already do so. I mean, Indonesia has far more refugees than Australia does, simply because their proximity to the rest of Southeast Asia. And so to suggest that all of those people who, they're massing on the shores of Indonesia to come here, is false. It's just strictly false. Okay, so there you have it. This week's not as crazy as it is some weeks. I think Easter managed to quell some of the more crazy letter writers. here's hoping next week will be more crazy than this week and back to its usual level. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. Bye.